Oh man, already it's time for another episode of Pretend Race Cars. Please stop me before I start compulsively making these every single day. This time we're going oval racing in Assetto Corsa with a surprise payware mod from the most respected group in the game, Racem Studio. As mentioned before, to give this car a proper shakedown, I'm going to trim the fat scene in a lot of sim racing reviews and just get straight to the point. You're going to hear about any quirks this car has right off the bat, and then we're going to dive into the car's overall difficulty level. And I think the big question everyone wants to know, what kind of racing does it produce? This is especially a big deal to talk about as AC was never really designed to be an oval racing sim, and everything from certain setup options just not being there to the overall netcode can have a really big butterfly effect on just the whole experience. And of course, we'll end by giving this thing a verdict. Is this a car that properly introduces oval racing to AC? Will it be something that collects dust with the hundreds of other mod cars you've installed? Or has RSS made an uncharacteristic slip up? Let's all figure this out. So this right here is what Racem Studio are calling the 2020 Hyperion. I'm not playing these games. This is a 2020 NASCAR Cup Series Ford Mustang. As excited as I am that RSS chose to model a stock car after being primarily an open wheel and GT payware mod outlet, this is probably the worst era of stock car racing they could have picked. I'm not sure if they're aware of that or not, but that's really besides the point. NASCAR itself is in a rating slump, and while drivers and fans are all begging for a car configuration consisting of high horsepower and low downforce because that generally produces the best on track product, NASCAR has instead gone the opposite direction with a low horsepower, high downforce package. So this results in cars that really don't require a lot of driver skill at most tracks. They're overly setup dependent, and dirty air makes it almost impossible to pass the leader. NASCAR hides this by only using footage from restarts and crashes in their promo material, but for those who actually watch the races each weekend, they know the outlook is pretty grim for the series. NASCAR will also be receiving a brand new car in 2022, so this car is nearing the end of its lifespan already. This car is a payware mod and retails for just under $6 Canadian. Obviously, the 3D model and the sound quality is going to reflect that. Alright, so what do you need to know about this car that might ruin your experience? By default, the Hyperion is preloaded with a pretty good setup for Watkins Glen. You can unload this thing in turn laps and run some really competitive times right out of the box. That being said, a road course setup is absolutely not the same as an oval setup. If you plan to try oval racing in AC, you're going to be several seconds off the pace with the default config, and it's going to handle like shit. RSS also haven't supplied any default oval setups or documentation as to just what adjustments you should make, so the casual NASCAR fan or iRacer looking for a change of pace isn't going to get a lot of mileage out of this thing unless you know your way around the setup menu. Some of the setup options aren't entirely realistic or even legal either. NASCAR doesn't allow a rear sway bar on ovals. You can adjust the rear sway bar on this car. RSS allows 4 degrees of rear camber on the tires. In real life, you're only allowed, I think, 3.5. It's basically a road racing spec NASCAR all the time. There's no oval configuration package. There's no grill tape setting, no track bar, no wedge, crossweight, none of that stuff. I'm also going to talk about the tires here too. So tire fall off, at least on ovals, just isn't really noticeable in this car. My buddy Tyler and I have been running in an AC NASCAR league for the past couple of weeks, and it's been possible to double stint the tires at both Las Vegas and Martinsville. Vegas I kind of understood. Martinsville's just not accurate. Apps like Sidekick would say the tires were losing their lifespan, but the lap times didn't actually suffer, and the car never really felt all that different through the course of a run. Near the end of a Martinsville race, there was a guy on new tires trying to catch me, and it took basically no effort to hold him off. So the difficulty of this car, that depends on your background. Even with all that I've said about setup inaccuracies, once you apply proper oval setup to the car and have the splitter sealed to the ground and a bit of inverse rake, you can drive this thing with your eyes closed. We had a pretty long green flag run at Vegas, and everything that the real life drivers were saying about how boring and gutless these cars are to drive, RSS actually replicated that 100%. So how they got there isn't exactly accurate with all the weird setup adjustments you're allowed to make, but the end driving experience is. I didn't know what I had to do to spin the car out, and I was bored as shit. This ruined modern NASCAR for me. Like, it immediately made sense why so many big name drivers have either retired or defected to IndyCar. That being said, I went into this understanding how these cars work and what kinds of weird shock and spring concepts I needed to run, which with this car is basically just zeros all the way around and then tuning looseness or tightness with both sway bars. The guys that didn't have a grasp on this really struggled. Because the leader is running full throttle the entire lap for almost the whole stint, if you have to lift at all for any reason or there's a cunt hair of understeer, you just drop like a rock from the leader. To me, it was almost like low speed IndyCar racing, where if you miss the setup even by a small amount, there was just no way to drive through it, and anything from dirty air to just having to change lines mid corner or race around other people would completely screw you over. On short tracks, I thought the car actually handled the best and actually quite enjoyed myself, but it was even more setup dependent. If you didn't have the rear as soft as possible and paid attention to your left rear rebound, it was really easy to get loose and have the car wander all over the place on you, which is accurate, but again, if you're just a casual NASCAR fan and don't really know your way around the garage menu, you would just get really frustrated. The on-track product, though, is what a lot of people I think want to know about because oval racing in ACs is kind of great unknown. No one's really done this before, or at least done it regularly. So, for starters, multi-groove racing is actually a thing. If someone takes away the preferred line at a track like Vegas, you have other options, and it's just as fast. Short track racing also generally plays out like short track racing. It's all about corner exit speed and how well you can get the power down. And at super speedways, the draft is pretty intense. You can ride behind people and get these giant fucking runs without much effort. In fact, it's a little too easy to pass multiple cars by yourself, but that can be dialed out, I think, in Content Manager's server options. You can turn down how effective the draft is. That being said, the big issue you have to battle with all the time, no matter what track you're on, is netcode. First thing people are probably going to want to do is try a race at Daytona since it's easy and super speedway racing is hilarious. On a small server with your friends, it was super easy to push people all the way around the track, especially if you used Content Manager's server options to jack up the quality. In an actual race setting with 15, 20, 25 cars on the track, it's just not practical though. AC has this thing called lag drafting where people kind of shoot back and forth as you get a run on them, which makes drafting super unpredictable. It's kind of hard to judge where their car is. You also get the odd netcode spike, so like you can be pushing someone perfectly straight for multiple laps in a row, and they'll just shoot off and wreck you for absolutely no reason. Plate racing, I just didn't find a lot of fun unless we were in a really small pack. Speedway racing fares marginally better, but AC really just can't handle the kind of contact that is regular and routine in NASCAR racing. You'll notice in AC when you make contact with someone online, their car will sort of pop and receive this massive shunt no matter how small the contact actually was. That's not good in a type of racing where you're constantly door to door with people. A good example here is my buddy Tyler at Vegas. This dude barely taps him. It's not even malicious, and Tyler just goes flying through the infield. This happens pretty regularly. So the racing as a whole is just a mixed bag of some things it does objectively better than iRacing, but you never really have the confidence to draft, tandem, or run door to door with people. So what's the verdict on the RSS Hyperion? It's definitely filler content. It's cool that a really respected modding team made something other than a GTR open wheel car for AC, and for the most part it is a polished quality product. But there are a couple of weird inaccuracies in the setup menu, and you're realistically just not going to find a lot of opportunities to race this thing. It's not a great offline experience due to AC's AI just not being ready for oval racing, and AC's online netcode ruins a lot of the traditional NASCAR experience you'd find in other sims. And I mean, there's really only one or two leagues currently using this car. So this really is a car that you'll try driving once, twice, maybe three times with friends in a private online lobby, but realistically is going to sit for a long time collecting dust on your car roster.